Have you ever heard a strange noise in your house and convinced yourself it was nothing? A squirrel in the attic. Old pipes. The house settling. That's exactly what Julie thought, until one terrifying night she discovered the sound wasn't coming from an animal at all. It was coming from someone who had been living inside her home. The crawl space. I've spent the majority of my adult life being entirely comfortable with solitude. That's not a reflection of my family dynamic or any failed romances. It's simply that I have always thrived when I have my own space to breathe. Whenever I used to date, I would almost always end things before the relationship could transition into something permanent. It wasn't out of sadness, it was a conscious choice. Being entirely independent allowed me to pour every ounce of my energy into building my business, and fortunately, that hustle paid off. My career now allows me to travel globally and collaborate with clients from all walks of life. I work essentially as a high-end interior designer, transforming empty spaces into my clients' exact visions. I'm currently in my mid-30s, and for the first time in my life, I have a roommate. Last year, an event occurred in my home that completely broke me, and now, the mere thought of being home alone terrifies me. Here is what happened. Years of endless grinding finally allowed me to purchase my absolute dream home. It was a beautiful, isolated property, and I had been living there for about 6 months before the paranoia started. Because my company was expanding rapidly, I was fortunate enough to be highly selective with my clientele, turning down a lot of projects so I could focus on top-tier work. This meant that even when I wasn't traveling, I was glued to my desk in my home office, drafting designs late into the night. A few months after moving in, I began noticing a faint, bizarre sound while working at my desk. It wasn't constant, but it was incredibly persistent. The noise resembled a muffled shuffling or dragging sound. I know that description is vague, but imagine the sound of someone slowly sliding a heavy cardboard box across a floor in the room right next to you. That is exactly what it felt like. The dragging was always brief, but it was just loud enough to shatter my concentration every single time it occurred. The first few times the noise echoed through the walls, I ignored it and kept typing. But once it upgraded to a semi-regular occurrence, it became impossible to brush off. One quiet afternoon, the strange shuffling started up again, and I finally snapped. I closed my laptop and hurried upstairs to investigate the source. I remember standing dead still in the upstairs hallway, holding my breath, desperately trying to catch even a faint rustle. But the moment I reached the top floor, the house would fall dead silent. I felt like I was slowly losing my mind. I would hear the noise downstairs, sprint up the steps like a lunatic, and find absolutely nothing. Once I proved to myself multiple times that there wasn't a physical person walking around my upper floor, I generalized the issue. I convinced myself that a family of squirrels must have chewed their way into the roof siding. Growing up, a massive squirrel infestation under my parents' roof used to keep me awake for weeks. And anyone who has dealt with pests knows exactly how destructive and loud they can be. Reaching the squirrel conclusion actually brought my mind some temporary peace. I figured I would just call an exterminator whenever my chaotic schedule cleared up. The shuffling continued for several more days. Every time the sound broke the silence, I would casually jot down a mental note to make that phone call. But with a million other professional fires to put out, the ceiling noise was the absolute least of my concerns. A few nights later, I found myself working much later than usual. By the time I finally shut down my computer and crawled into bed, it was well past 2 o'clock in the morning. As I lay there in the dark waiting for my mind to shut off, that familiar shuffling sound started up right above me. This was the very first time I had ever heard it at night. I tried to ignore it and pull the blankets over my head, but this time, the pattern was different. Usually it was a quick, isolated drag, but tonight, it sounded like continuous, heavy movement. It annoyed me to the point that I actually stood up on my mattress, pressing my ear flat against the ceiling drywall to listen. The moment my weight shifted on the bed, the shuffling stopped instantly. But what replaced it was infinitely worse. Through the thin ceiling, I could distinctly hear the sound of slow, heavy breathing. The realization hit me like ice water. My house featured a crawl space, a cramped, shallow attic cavity directly above the master bedroom. It was incredibly small, difficult to access, and I had never once opened it since buying the house. Knowing that the crawl space was directly over my head made my heart beat erratically. If that sound was indeed human breathing, I didn't want to process the implications of what that meant. Desperate to prove myself wrong and still hoping it was just a large animal, I forced myself to gather some courage. The crawl space access was controlled by a standard pull-down nylon string attached to a hatch in the ceiling, usually tucked neatly near the closet door. Because I'm on the shorter side, I had to drag a heavy wooden chair over just to reach the cord. I grabbed the string and pulled down hard, forcing the jammed hatch to give way. The folding wooden ladder extended down into my bedroom. With my chest pounding, I slowly climbed the rungs. I didn't even climb all the way up. I just poked my head past the threshold of the dark attic and scanned the space with a flashlight. I didn't realize how truly terrified I was until I felt my hands shaking on the ladder. The space was pitch black, dusty, and completely empty except for two massive structural wooden beams running down either side of the floor. After a swift, panicked glance, I climbed back down, slammed the hatch shut, and secured the string. I was successfully scaring myself over nothing. Unable to force myself back into bed, I went downstairs to the living room, turned on the bright lights, and flipped on the TV to distract my thoughts. I couldn't shake the mental image of someone crouching in the pitch darkness of that attic, hiding just behind one of those thick wooden beams. Eventually, exhaustion began to take over, and I started drifting in and out of a light sleep on the couch. Right as I was losing consciousness, the distinct sound of a door loudly creaking opened shattered my rest. The noise was violent enough to make me sit bolt upright. I scanned the entire living room, my eyes wide in the dark. Silence. I cautiously slipped off the couch and took a few quiet steps into the kitchen. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. I walked out of the kitchen and entered the long, narrow hallway that led to my home office. The corridor was pitch black, so I reached out and flipped the wall switch, half expecting a figure to be standing at the far end under the light. The hallway was empty. I slowly walked into the office, verified everything was secure, and breathed a sigh of relief. After completing my sweep of the downstairs area, I turned toward the stairs to head back to bed. But the moment my feet reached the top landing, my blood ran cold. The white nylon pull string for the crawl space was dangling all the way down to the floor, and worse, it was slowly swaying back and forth in the stagnant air. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe I hadn't secured it properly when I closed it earlier, but deep down, I knew I had locked it tightly out of sheer paranoia. As I walked down the upper hall, I noticed my bedroom door was almost entirely pushed shut. I am incredibly strict about leaving that door wide open at all times. When I reached out and pushed the wood, it let out a loud, distinct creak, the exact same creaking sound that had woken me up from the couch downstairs. Trembling, I flipped on the bedroom lights. The room looked entirely normal. Just as I was about to turn around and run back downstairs to grab my keys, my eyes caught a small detail on the hardwood floor right next to my nightstand. It was a fresh, distinct clump of dark mud. I dropped down to one knee, leaning over to inspect the dirt. The moment my knee hit the floor, that exact same heavy, rhythmic breathing sound filled the quiet room. It wasn't coming from the ceiling anymore. It was coming from right beside me. I slowly lowered my head all the way to the floorboards and looked directly beneath the bed frame. Lying flat on his back, staring directly into my eyes from the shadows under my mattress, was a strange, middle-aged man. I let out a blood-curdling scream and threw myself backward, my palms slamming against the floor as I tried to scramble away. The man didn't aggressively lunge out, but he raised his voice and shouted in a calm, chilling tone. "Hi, Julie. It's okay. Everything is okay." I tried to stand, but my legs felt like lead, as if I was running through wet cement. He just kept repeating those exact words over and over from beneath the bed. "It's okay, it's okay." Adrenaline finally kicked in. I sprinted down the stairs, grabbed my phone off the counter, flew out the front door, and scrambled into my car. I slammed the lock button, started the engine, and tore out of the driveway. There was a 24-hour diner about 2 miles down the highway, and I drove there in complete hysterics. I ran inside the brightly lit restaurant and immediately dialed 911. The police dispatchers sent a patrol car to the diner to secure me, while 3 other units rushed to surround my house. But by the time the officers breached the property, the intruder had already vanished into the night. When they searched the crawl space thoroughly, they found the terrifying reality of his stay: several empty plastic water bottles, food wrappers, and a small travel pillow tucked neatly behind one of the wooden structural pillars. I checked into a local motel that night and stayed there for nearly a month, absolutely paralyzed by the thought of returning home. I spent thousands of dollars installing top-of-the-line surveillance cameras and motion sensors on every square inch of that property. It has been over a year since that night, and that man has never resurfaced. I don't know where he went, but I know he is still out there. I do have a horrifying theory about his identity, though. My father used to have a close acquaintance, someone our family had to forcefully cut off years ago because he had developed a deeply inappropriate, obsessive fixation on me when I was younger. The man under my bed looked like a much older, disheveled version of him. If it wasn't him, then whoever that stranger was, he knew my exact name, he knew my schedule, and he had been living directly above my head for weeks. It made me realize that sometimes, simply locking your front doors isn't enough if someone truly wants to get inside.
If these stories gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying true encounters. Drop a comment below telling me which story scared you the most. And remember, keep your doors locked tonight. See you in the dark.